New updates in the Sean Diddy Combs legal saga. The rap mogul gets an official sentencing date. He gets hit with allegations from a shocking new lawsuit. A juror speaks out, and also, apparently, Diddy receives a standing ovation from inmates.
Diddy's empire shattered in real time. As the judge delivered the final ruling, the courtroom froze in eerie silence. In a moment that rattled the entire music world, Diddy dissolved into uncontrollable tears. This wasn't for show, it was raw, unfiltered collapse.
The verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, but I'll tell you what, this case, not over. No. Important hearing today, sort of. We got to talk about why. Well, Judge Arun Subramanian had sent a tentative October 3rd sentencing date for Diddy on his convictions of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Remember, that's what he was convicted of. He was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy, and he was acquitted of the 2 sex trafficking counts. But he was convicted of these prostitution charges. And at one point, there was reporting that defense counsel for Sean Combs and prosecutors, they had then agreed to switch the date to September 22nd. And we thought, okay, because today's hearing was supposed to be about expediting the October hearing. Then they agreed to September 22nd. Now apparently it's back to October 3rd. This is all over the place. Very confusing. We'll get it straightened out. I gotta say it's interesting because Combs' defense counsel had originally stated last week, when it was the October 3rd date, that they wanted that sentencing expedited, meaning they wanted it to happen sooner. And one of the things that Sean Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, had said was, quote, the mother of some of his children had passed away many years ago. These kids, the 2 daughters here sitting in the middle of your honor's second row, don't have a parent. Obviously referring to the death of Kim Porter in 2018, mother of Christian, Jesse, Delilah, Quincy. And by the way, remember Sean Combs was denied bail, so it wasn't even like he got to go home after the verdict. But clearly they wanted this expedited. They want his sentencing to happen as quickly as possible. They want him out of jail. They want him out of prison as soon as possible. And also it's interesting because prosecutors, they need time for the pre-sentencing investigation and report. Basically, that's when a probation officer interviews the defendant, looks at the history, the background, childhood, education, employment, criminal history, finances, the mental and physical health of the defendant. There are interviews that are conducted with family and friends. The officer looks at various court and school records, employment records, financial records. The officer could speak to the victims in the case, law enforcement that were involved in the investigation, provide all of this information in a report to the judge, because here the judge is going to have a lot of discretion when it comes to the sentence. What could a sentence look like? Well, prosecutors indicated in a filing that before even doing a pre-sentencing investigation, Combs is looking at 51 to 63 months, a little over 4 to 5 years in prison. The defense seems to be pushing for 21 to 27 months, so a little over 1.5 to 2 years. But remember, Combs has been sitting in federal lockup since September at the MDC. So if he gets time served, he really wouldn't be spending that much time behind bars. Now, of course, they're the extremes. When you talk about transportation to engage in prostitution, the maximum for each count is 10 years in prison. You stack them together, you get 20 years. Okay, based upon the facts in this case, it seems highly unlikely he would get that much. Other side, you get the idea. There's no minimum for this charge. So could he get time served and walk free? Also seems unlikely, in that you're dealing with multiple instances of transporting Jane and Cassie, the 2 victims in this case, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. You could say this is an aggravating factor why I don't think he's just going to get time served.
This was raw truth. This was unfiltered. A man finally confronting the fallout of years steeped in allegations, whispers relentless. Behind the scenes tension. The courtroom trembled, not from noise but from the weight of what came next. The jury's ruling wasn't just unexpected, it hit like a fault line snapping. Guilty on serious damning charges. What had long circulated in hushed tones was now official. For years stories lingered about Diddy's secret worldist grip on the industry, powered by fear and manipulation, but Noto's whispers have erupted into a deafening truth. Prison looms. Inside the courtroom, insiders say Diddy's posture changed the moment the word guilty echoed. His confident mask shattered. The tailored suit and glossy image buckled under justice's weight. He buried his face in his hands. He wept, and for the first time in ages Diddy seemed stripped of all power. The judge was blunt. Locking eyes with him delivered a message that this trial reached far beyond one man's name.
Right, you got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. That. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If they had called, let's say, Christina Courtroom, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed, if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not, but if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in a Mia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact.
This was about holding power accountable in an industry that too often looks the other way. Fame isn't immunity, the judge declared. Power won't shield Yao, and wealth can't erase truth. His words echoed past the courtroom, shaking the foundation of the entertainment world. This wasn't just a trial, it was a moment of reckoning, and Diddy knew it. 50 Cent, a persistent voice throughout the scandal, didn't wait. Minutes after the verdict, dropped a cryptic but heavy post. Told Yao no more games, no need for details. Everyone got the message. 50 had long warned the industry about the shadows lurking behind Diddy's legacy, and now Court had confirmed it. And now Court had made it official. The internet lit up instantly. Stars fans and former insiders all chimed in. Some were stunned. Others confessed they'd seen it coming. A few even shared stories they'd once been too scared to reveal. The verdict cracked something open. Years of silence began to splinter. What stood out most was how fast Diddy's inner circle backed away. People who once praised him shared glowing tributes. Built fortunes around his name were suddenly silenter, worse, wiping him from their pages.
Count two, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor, for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him, that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because, like you said, the readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought, they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges. But I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury, to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. What is, just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cass.
Behind closed doors, insiders say the phones went silent, loyalty vanished. Diddy's entourage evaporated, he stood isolated. As sentencing began, the judge didn't mince words. This wouldn't be a slap on the wrist, it would be concrete and swinkle. Time, the courtroom heard a sentence that stunned even veteran legal minds, years snit months. No VIP privileges, no fame-based exceptions. Diddy's lawyers pushed for mercy, citing his charity work, cultural impact, and legacy in hip-hop. But the prosecution held firm. They exposed a pattern, not a misstep, but a life steeped in control, manipulation, hidden abuse. The judge agreed, and in that defining moment Diddy broke. He wasn't the mogul anymore, not the life of the part, not the trend architect, not the music kingpin. He was an inmate. Outside the courthouse, the cameras captured it all. Protesters who had long demanded justice were there holding signs. Supporters showed up too. But even they looked stunned. It was as if reality had finally caught up to a myth that had been floating just out of reach for decades. This verdict doesn't close a chapter, it ignites a cultural reckoning. It sends a message to every so-called untouchable who believed power could shield them from justice. That illusion is crumbling. Diddy's emotional collapse is now the face of that shift. As 50 Cent keeps sounding the alarm and more names get dragged into unfolding investigations, and thing is clear, this is just the surface. There are more accounts, more survivors, more truth on its way. Entertainment once ran on illusion glamourcy, but those doors have swung open. Light is flooding in and no PR machine can undo what the gavel sealed. Prison time. Diddy's a giant in music now stands a convicted felon staring down years inside. The empire he helped build will never look the same. The unraveling has already begun. Britain's fleeing bills canceled.
You need to tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because that who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, and we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again, even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be? I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question I think that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions.
Labels are reassessing alliances. Major streaming giants have begun discreetly scrubbing playlists, pulling feature sand, bracing for the legal storm ahead. This isn't just a fall from grace, it's a full-scale implosion. No matter how vast his fortune or how high his name once flew, descent is brutal and permanent. As 50 Cent put it, the game's over. But this isn't just about Diddy. What's unraveling now is the machinery behind him, handlers, fixers, and silencers. The ones who watched woe knew woe stayed quiet. They're all being pulled into the glare. Big names once tied to Diddy's empire are scrambling, contracts are vanishing, PR firms are bailing. Artists once proud to call him mentor have gone mute, terrified of the blowback. Behind the scenes, it's pure chaos. Those who once felt untouchable, safe by proximity, not involvement, are now realizing they were gears in the very machine that allowed it all to thrive. And know they're asking themselves, when will the phone ring? When will the subpoenas hit? Even more unsettling leaks have started. Anonymous Insider 6 employees, former confidential, speaking up. And what they're revealing isn't just incriminating, it's calculated. Lavish estates laced with hidden cameras. Private parties with confiscated phones, monitored guests, controlled movement. All of it pointing to a methodical playbook. Create leveraging force, silence, protect the image at any cost. This wasn't about excess, it was about power, psychological dominance. But now with the court's decision looming large, ethic grip is fracturing. Diddy's name is the gold standard for wealth, and Grinda's become a warning, a symbol of what unfolds when unchecked power is finally forced to answer. More than that, it's a reckoning, because if this can reach someone as protected, as rich, as revered as Diddy.
We have this hearing next week about whether to expedite the sentencing, happening before October 3rd. If both sides agree, great. If they don't, what is a compelling legal argument for the defense to say, we want this sentencing to happen much sooner?
Well, I mean, we know that behind the scenes, what they want, of course, is they expect a chance that he's going to be released. So that's their big motivating factor, of course. Whether the court abides by that, I mean, it is a substantial change in circumstance. He was acquitted of all of these serious charges, right?
But he was just denied bail. He was denied bail again.
He was denied bail again, and I actually learned that on your segment yesterday afternoon as I was sort of doing my preparation for this. But we have to remember that one of the things that he got in trouble for, that Diddy got in trouble for in jail, was using other inmates' calling number. Remember that? So he was calling witnesses in the case from jail using other inmates. That was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I mean, I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the court. Sure. And it's almost like he couldn't get out of his own way there at the beginning. But he had an excellent defense team.
He does. So assuming for a moment, whenever the sentencing hearing happens, right? Let's say it happens in a month from now. Let's say it has October 3rd. The question is, what's his sentence? As we mentioned, the prosecution in a filing from yesterday talked about the guidelines range being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that
it can happen to anyone. No one stands beyond reach. Not anymore. Fear pulses through the industry now. Conversations shift in hushed tones. Events are canceled. Projects put on hold. Media outlets that once stayed silent are now racing to investigate, get ahead of a story they once avoided. And for the victims, those brave enough to come forward And those still in hiding fears a new energy, a newfound visibility, a hope. That finally they'll be hard, their truths acknowledged. 50 Cent isn't backing down either, he's already teased more revelations ahead. In his words, this was only step one, the rest, the world isn't ready. Love him or hate him, own thing is undeniable. 50's voice is shifting the culture. He's not just trolling online, he's forcing the industry to confront what it long ignored. This moment isn't just about one man's sentence, it's about justice, truth, and breaking cycles. Diddy's breakdown in court wasn't merely personal, it was emblematic, the collapse of a carefully crafted mask, shattering of illusion. Though the courtroom emptied and cameras moved on, the verdict's impact still echoes through entertainment's corridor, spores, seats, and countless lives touched by him. Diddy's legacy won't be defined by accolades or chart toppers, but by a warning: empires built on fear and secrecy inevitably crumble beneath the weight of truth. No facing percent man once known for making crowds weep with joy at lavish parties is left to cry alone. The game has changed. No one, not even Diddy, is untouchable anymore.